We have to start talking to our students like they're just out of season, right? Like they haven't been practicing for their sport. And so we've got to get them coached up. We've got to get them back in shape to be able to play their game. And he's specifically talking about talking to other students, being out and among other people, building community. It's just a muscle that they have not practiced for a really long time. And so we want to talk about that, not in terms of like a deficit language, like what is wrong with these students, but actually just they haven't practiced for a while. Welcome, everybody. I'm Rachel Phillips-Buck, VP for Student Success at Ferris Resources. I'm having trouble already, Matt. It's a bad sign. Joined by Matt Boisvert, our president.
Hi.
Hi. You joined us for Cap and Gown. I'm excited about today because we are talking about hot topics.
Yeah.
And this comes out of, we have just had a great week of talking to our clients and being at a conference and just listening to all the things that are bubbling up to the surface. And so really glad that you guys could join us today.
Yeah, thanks for joining us.
So first of all, we have just been in Boston where we went to visit a couple of our schools. We got to see Allison from Emmanuel College in Boston. She was such a kind host to us. She took us all around. She showed us all the buildings. We got to see just the community on that campus. It's so fun to walk around with her because everyone we ran into was like, Allison, it's so good to see you. You just see that she is a community builder on that campus. So that was really fun.
I love being on that campus. They've done just remarkable work for student success. So yeah, that was really great.
Yeah, it's a pretty amazing campus. It's funny because Allison was like, Rachel, I was trying to think the last time we were together. And then she was like, oh, right, I've never actually met you before. But we just feel a lot of camaraderie and kindredness with her because of the work she does. So that was a great talk about our theme of building joy.
That definitely brought joy.
It was so awesome. And then I don't know if you've noticed, Matt, but I feel like people are talking about being joyful everywhere. I don't know if it's like one of those glitches where once you start looking for it, you see it everywhere. But I just feel like
that's a good one.
Yeah, for sure. I feel like it's every place that I go and everyone I talk to, they're like, we got to build joy into our lives. So I like that.
Well, when you visit Boston and you get to eat lobster, that's one way to bring joy to your life.
Amen. That's a great way to bring joy to your life. So we were in Boston. I know NASPA is happening in Boston right now, actually.
Yep.
Yeah. And so we have a lot of partner schools and clients who are there. So wish you all well. I hope that trip has been great. I've been hearing from some of you that you got there a couple of days early so you could do Boston, have lobster, all the other things on your list. I hope that conference is great for you. We actually were at JASPA, which is sort of I don't know, Matt, can you describe what that conference is?
So JASPA they always do it as an add-on to NASPA. It's for Jesuit schools. There's 28 Jesuit colleges and universities, and they come together to spend time together in community, and then some go on and participate in NASPA. But it's a way for them to be able to talk about specific issues that are happening at JASPA colleges and universities. And it's all on the student affairs side.
Yeah. So it was at Boston College this year. So we got to go and be on that campus. And we did a really fun sort of event where we just had this whiteboard and we said, thank you for inspiring me. And we asked everyone at that conference to come and trace their hand and then put the name of somebody who inspired them. And it was just so delightful to see the people's faces when you said who inspired you, like what that fond remembrance looked like from their faces. And then also, this is such a great group because they have been together for a long time. So you would have people come up to put their hand up and they would see their name on somebody else's hand, or, it just was really a great way to build joy.
Yeah.
And to have that fond remembrance of people who impacted you. So,
yeah, you can see Jeff Gray there has been such a huge part of JASPA, and his name is actually on many of the hands that are written on that wall.
Yeah.
Really neat.
So the hot topics that we're talking about today are coming out of the time that we have spent both on our campuses and then also during this conference, just listening to the things that are coming up to the surface. I want for us to think about our time together on Cap and Gown today as like the meeting after you go to a conference, where you just say, like, here's all the best stuff that I heard, the things that grabbed me, the stories that I'm not going to forget. That's kind of what we're going to do today on Cap and Gown, in kind of 4 different sections. So we're going to talk about rebuilding students and community. We're going to talk about counseling on a campus. We're going to talk about engaging first generation and high need students. And then we're also going to talk about student engagement overall. So those are going to be kind of our 4 topics. And we're just going to go through some of the best stuff that we heard there. So I do want to do State of the Union, but first, we're always talking about rhythm of the academic year. Hard to believe we are in April. I don't know how that happened. But here's your summary on what's happening in the rhythm of the academic year for your students. Their excitement about the arrival of good weather, also known as spring fever, which, depending on where you live, I mean, I have been talking about how nice the weather is, but the downside of that is, Matt, you and I, neither one are feeling great. We're having like all the pollen in the air.
Just allergies are awful here. And to leave Boston and come back to Texas and get hit, I'm definitely feeling it.
So like spring fever, excited about spring, and spring fever, maybe having allergy problems because of everything that's growing. Students are having anxiety about choosing their roommate for the next year. Where are they going to live? Are they going to get left out? You remember all of that anxiety.
Yeah.
Nervous about registering for courses. So am I going to get the courses I want? This is another step further in my major. Am I happy with my major? A lot of anxiety comes around that piece. End of semester pressure begins. I said in our staff meeting this morning, this is about the time that students start to get nervous about whether or not they can pass a class, right? Whereas we've identified them in the 3rd week of the semester because faculty have said, hey, I'm worried. This is about the time that they're like, I have so much success debt. I'm not sure how I'm going to be able to recover. So there's a lot of pressure around that. And then, of course, for our seniors, this anticipation of the end, but also the sadness of leaving your friends, anxiety about next steps, like what's going to happen, right? So those are all things that are swirling for our students on campus. And I told you my favorite trick is to just look like a magician when you say to a senior, hey, you're probably feeling anxious about these things. And they're like, yes. How did you know?
How did you know? Yeah.
Because I'm an expert in this. So super helpful to think about as you're talking to students. All right, let's move on to State of the Union. All right, first thing is pretty important. I don't know if you have your hand in this for our listeners, but you remember that during the pandemic, the emergency government aid opened the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program for all college students enrolled at least half-time who were eligible for work-study programs or had the expected family contribution of 0. So when COVID started, they were like, hey, we're going to give out food benefits for all of those students. Okay, those are about to expire. So the Education Department is urging higher ed institutions to connect their students to SNAP resources, which is a kind of a different way of getting those food resources because the expansion of those other funds is going to end in the next couple of weeks. So you want to make sure that you are reaching out to your students, outreach campaign to notify eligible students of the upcoming changes and help them apply or reapply before the time runs out. The expansion comes to an end May 11th, but state agencies must process first-time SNAP applications by June 9th under the new guidance. So you have until June 9th to get that done. So there's a little bit of a lapse there, but you just want to make sure that you're paying attention to that. And then one other thing is that because students who are getting these other benefits, it was tied to work-study eligibility. You just want to be careful about what the new SNAP requirements say about work-study, whether you have to be eligible or actually have a job and how that could get messy. So I think for every state, it may be a little bit different, but just have that on your radar for any of those students that you know are going to need those extra benefits.
Such an important service. And just thinking, I just trying to go back to our surveys where I think it was like 11% of our students had food insecurities. And so really important, not only to guide them to that, but also we have schools that provide food pantries for their students. And so just being a resource in many ways to help those students who are struggling with that.
Yeah, Matt, it's a really good point that even if they're not eligible for SNAP benefits, so even if whatever that gap is doesn't allow them to get those benefits, if these other benefits are going away and you have a food pantry or you have some other service, what you'll see then is a higher need for students because they're not receiving that first benefit and they're not going to receive that second one. So you just want to have it on your radar for sure. Okay, the other thing I want to tell you that's happening is that in the legislature, so there are actually 3 bills in the House to try to fix isn't the right word, but maybe expand Pell. They're calling it short-term Pell. So right now you can only use Pell for a long semester. It's 15 weeks or longer. There are 3 bills in the House where they're trying to fix that. They want for students to be able to use it for shorter courses or for summer courses. There's a lot of conversation. This article is like the reason. So the fact that it's in the House in 3 different bills tells you how important it is to address because everybody is like, we got to figure this out. But also the fact that there are 3 different bills tells you how many tricky pieces there are to try to figure out how to address it well. So one of the bills is saying we absolutely are never going to allow Pell for for-profit universities because we don't trust them. Another bill is saying we can allow it for for-profit, but you have to do this equation where it's like after 3 years, when you graduate, does your revenue or your salary go up? Anyway, it's super complicated. I don't think that they've landed on the way that they're going to try to adjust this. But what they're concerned about is that you are using this money to further your vocational goals, not in kind of a like, I don't know why you took that course, right? That's what they're trying to solve. So we'll have to pay attention to see how that shakes out, but people are working on it.
Yeah, there's a lot going on with Pell, and really the double Pell movement is probably the most coherent, like a singular, let's just double what Pell is.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Okay. The number of Hispanic serving institutions climbs to 571. So that's in the 2021-2022 academic year, calendar year. That's really interesting because in 2020 and 2021, that number shrank for the first time in 20 years due to enrollment declines. So about 20% of all U.S. colleges have this HSI distinction. It's about 1.37 million full-time equivalent undergraduate students in 2021, 2022. Here's my problem with a Hispanic serving institution. I mean, I don't have problems with them, but here's my problem with the designation is that I have been to multiple presentations, not at JASTA, but just over the last couple of years, where a school says, we are designated as a Hispanic serving institution, and that designation just comes on the number of Hispanic students you serve. It literally is like, oh, 80% of your students are Hispanic, you're serving Hispanic students, right? But in these presentations, I'm like, hey, tell me how you serve those students. And they're like, oh, just the way we serve all students, right? Not that there's a special program, not that we're trying to understand the specific issues, there's not a like strategically serving Hispanic students. It is just a designation that you have this number of Hispanic students on your campus.
I think what you're saying is when you receive that designation, there isn't some magic that happens that transforms your campus and suddenly these new programs come on and your students are supported in this new way.
Yeah.
You got the designation and now it's up to you and your institution to actually craft how you support that student population.
Yes. And actually, it could be confusing for parents who might hear that you are designated as a Hispanic serving institution. And they would be like, oh, awesome. You have this figured out. And in actuality, that is not true at all. So I'm happy for that number to grow, but I wish there was like a certification, or I just wish there was another actual designation that says we do an excellent job of serving this population of students. That would make me really, really happy.
Yeah. I mean, the federal government does have grants specifically for programs to support to build that out. But I think to what you were saying is you actually could just be going along, and just by the fact that there's changing demographics in your state, you suddenly receive this designation. And there's a lot that goes with that as far as being, for local awareness and just how that's talked about. But it doesn't stop there, right?
For sure.
And so it goes back to my promise triangle. How then are we enabling or equipping our team and our students who we're now serving a different demographic? It's good.
Yeah, and I was thinking, Matt, we serve a lot of Hispanic serving institutions. It would be great to go to those that actually do have a remarkable program in place and say, hey, come and teach our listeners what you do and how you decided to do it. So put it on the list of things we need to talk about. Okay, I have two more for you. This, I cannot believe how often I have to talk about gambling in Castle. Why is that? All right. This is the story of 4 institutions. The first one is Las Vegas Sand Corporation. So that's not a college. It's just it's a corporation that has announced that they are going to bring restaurants, hotel rooms, a live performance venue, gambling, and other amenities to 80 acres in that used to be the Nassau Veterans Memorial Coliseum. So they're going to knock that down and they're going to build a huge gambling facility. Okay. Well, there's a school, Long Island University, that's 8 miles away from where they're proposing to build it. And they have hospitality management and culinary arts. So they're pretty happy about it. They're like, this is going to be so helpful. Our students are going to be able to go and learn and work and all of that kind of stuff. So they're happy 8 miles away. The next institution is Nassau Community College, 12,000 students. They're about 3 miles away from the proposed site. They also have hospitality management, culinary programs, food and nutrition studies. They're like, this is going to be so helpful. We're going to be able to get our students jobs, blah, 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 right? Okay. Hofstra University is literally across the street from this build site. So the place they're asking to put it, the road that this build site is on, actually cuts Hofstra's campus in half. And then there's this area where they want to build this casino. And the president is like, you cannot do this. Parents won't send their students here. We're worried about students gambling away their financial aid. We're not sure that we want to draw people to the casino that's right across from our students. Like, it's an influx of a lot of people, right? So also, Hofstra doesn't have any major that's going to benefit from this. So they don't have culinary arts. They don't have these other things. So it's going to be really interesting because the board of Hofstra is writing saying, please don't do this. And then you have these other much bigger schools actually who are like, we love it. Come bring it on. It's far enough away from us that we're not worried about it. And it's going to really help our major. So I wonder what's going to happen there. It will be curious.
So has this already started? Have they already bought the land? And
so they are leasing. It's a lease takeover. And I think it has happened because it says they announced their plans to do this. The board, let me see what the board said. The board is just like, hey, this is a really terrible idea. Is there anything that you can do to stop it? It's also pretty interesting because the Las Vegas Sands Corporation did this in Pennsylvania. They partnered with a school that was more like a community college, but the Sands Corporation did a bunch of benefits. They helped them raise $2.2 million. They had scholarships. So they were working with the school to try to benefit the students. But I just can't get away from gambling across the street from the college. It seems bad. It seems like a bad idea. Maybe I'm just dodgy. Maybe I'm just getting old. I don't know. It's okay. All right. The last one in State of the Union. This makes me really happy. This is coming out of Howard Community College in Maryland. the college president was like, we need to have a family study room. I want for every family on this campus, every parent who is a student, to have a place to go, let their kids run wild. I mean, not really run wild, but be amused while they're studying. So she, in the library, built the family study room. It has computers, whiteboard, comfortable couches, a TV, a DVD player, age-appropriate books, games, magazines, and more. She is just like, 1 in 5 college student is a parent, and we have got to start sending out these cues that it is okay for your kids to be with you while you are studying. Matt, I was thinking about all of the research that came out about internet at homes, right? Like space at homes. So if you have a parent who doesn't have good internet at homes and they don't have space for them to study and for their kid to be able to play, then they are relying on our colleges and universities to give them a place where they can study and have their kids with them. So let's see, 71%, this is coming out of a survey that Generation Hope did. It's called The Child Care Barrier, the Impacts of Inaccessibility and Costly Childcare for Student Parents. 71% of the people interviewed rely on informal or unpaid childcare. 71%, which means you can't count on it because it's like, my mom's free, she can take them, or I can drop them off at my best friend's, but it's not guaranteed, right? 92% don't have access to or were unaware of on-campus childcare options, and 82% are living below the national poverty line. So I told you, after we talked about single moms last week or the week before, like, this is a thing I can get behind. Let's make it easier for parents to get an education and take care of their kids. That seems like a worthy thing.
What I love is exposing your kids to that environment, right? A learning environment like that, and where they can see modeling from other adults, like, oh, wow, mom, you're a part of this community. That's really powerful. They'll never forget it.
That's right. And their reflections on how hard you are working to accomplish this thing gives it value, right? When they see, wow, my mom or dad is committed to this and working hard, it must be very important. It's awesome.
It's so different than moms at home and working, studying at the kitchen table as the kids are going about and whatever. Such a different environment for them to take that to a campus environment, and for them then to have this whole world open up to them, and literally in a library where, hey, you go explore, look how much you can learn here. This is where the value is. Yeah. I love it.
It's great. And then on that article, they have a long list of schools who have started to do this. So I will be so happy if that becomes a trend. That's the State of the Union.
Very good.
Okay, so I want to talk about all of the great things that we heard over the last couple of days. First, I want to start with this conversation about rebuilding students' resilience in campus community. And like I said, I think we just lay out on the table all the great things that we heard about and talk through some of the great stories. So first of all, this language from Rob Parmack from Fordham, I love. He said, we have to start talking to our students like they're just out of season, right? Like they haven't been practicing for their sport. And so we've got to get them coached up. We've got to get them back in shape to be able to play their game. And he's specifically talking about talking to other students, being out and among other people, building community. It's just a muscle that they have not practiced for a really long time. And so we want to talk about that, not in terms of like a deficit language, like what is wrong with these students, but actually just they haven't practiced for a while.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just thinking about running track, and you're running the 200 and all of a sudden you take 2 years off and you're put back on the track. You got to go run that 200. You haven't run it in 2 years. Yeah. That might be the slowest time I'd ever have, right? Without a doubt.
But it's not that you're slow. It's just you haven't practiced that, right? Which is so helpful, I think, to frame for students when they're feeling anxiety, when they're feeling stressed out, which we know is happening all the time, when they don't know how to be in community, it's not that you're bad at that. It's just that we've got to get you coached up so that you can do that really well. So I love that language.
I love that language.
Yeah. He also talked about back to good, build to great, which I also love. This idea that like, hey, we're back together, and that is good. People were so hungry for community for so long, and so we are happy to be back to good. But it is going to take some work to build to great. And I see this woven throughout so many conversations that I'm hearing in higher ed, which is just we have forgotten some of the things that we have always done, how to be around each other, how to build programs, how to like, there's just stuff that we haven't practiced. And so there's a startup cost to then come back to it and try to remember what you're doing to make that a really great program. So I really love that language too. And all of that is tied to this idea that community is suffering. Rob was talking about how he had an in-person class, and it was like the only in-person class or one of the very few on campus. And he started noticing that all of his students would show up like in their fancy clothes, like their nicest clothes that they had. And he's like, why is everybody so fancy? And they're like, this is the only place we go. Like we're not able to get out of our room. So we like get ready for this class. And he's like, okay, well, we're going to start having breakfast together. So we're going to have fancy philosophy breakfast where you can dress up and you can come. And it's such a great reminder of how people long for community and are trying to find it, and also how we have to rebuild what we're doing, right? Because we really lost that for a while. Go ahead. Do you want to say more about that?
I just think that the thing that struck me is it's not like he sat down and he put together a plan and a PowerPoint of how he's going to build community with the students. He was just real. He engaged them, and he's such a great person. But the way that he just was present with them and then led them into different activities, it wasn't some grand scheme. It was just, hey, I'm just going to be present.
Yeah. He also has a great story of how when he was an undergraduate, he was running a race at 7:30 in the morning on a Saturday.
Cross country,
and it was rainy and foggy. And he came over a hill and he saw one of his faculty members who had come to watch him run cross country. His faculty member was smoking a cigar. And he was like, good job, Rob. You can do it, And he said, talk about belonging cues. That is a place where I understood this person sees me. They want to show up for me. They're building community. They're committed to me. And when we're not together, we don't have the ability to do that. And also, I was just thinking about how you model that behavior. If we are coaching up our students to remember how to have community, how to be connected to each other, you model that by showing up for them, right? By saying, this is how, when we're connected in community, this is how I talk to you. This is what I do for you. This is how I see you. And so I cannot tell you how many times I talk to practitioners who are like, these students have no idea how to resolve conflict, how to engage together, how to show up in the same room together. We have to model that behavior and coach them up so that they can remember what it's like to use that muscle.
I was just thinking about being that professor, smoking the cigar, but waiting, anticipating Rob to come over that hill, right? And so that he didn't miss it. He was there. He was there for that one purpose, and to encourage Rob to continue and press on with his race. That's just such a neat modeling. So that, again, that's not hard work. That's just being intentional about being present.
And, we always talk with student leaders about how you pour into them and then they pour into other students, which we'll talk a little bit about in just a minute. But this idea of it doesn't have to be a grand gesture. What Rob said is, because that faculty member showed up for me, when Dr. So-and-so then said to me, hey, this student is doing this thing, let's go and see them. Rob was on board because he was like, yes, I understand. You have poured that into me, and I'm going to then pour it into these other students to teach them about how to do community. So it's great. Okay, and then the last one I want to talk about out of that session was just this idea of creating a standard, what they called examine, which is like, we're always talking about mentoring in the moment. So it doesn't have to be this long, like drawn out relationship where you're like, what's going on with you? Let's talk about that for 6 hours. It can just be a series of questions where when you come across a student, you just ask them. And so his example was, hey, where did you find joy today? And he's like, make them be very specific. I found joy when right before I came on the podcast, Matt brought me some coffee. That made me feel joyful, right? And then he says, good job. Then he says, where did you feel stuck or feel bleak? So tell me about a specific time today when you felt stuck or you felt bleak. And then this is my favorite one.
I won't mention mine.
Okay, don't. The last one is, where did you receive unearned grace? So he says, we have a tendency to highlight all of the ways that we did not get what we thought we deserved, did not get treated well, got shortchanged, whatever. Like our brain's programmed to be like, that wasn't fair. I didn't like that. That shouldn't have happened. That was bad. He says, when you ask this question of where did you receive unearned grace, where are the places where a person had no reason to be nice to you and they were, where a gift fell into your lap, where you didn't have an expectation, you didn't earn kindness, whatever that looks like, where is a place where you received unearned grace? And that helps your brain then recenter on gratitude and highlighting the places where what an unexpected gift that thing was. That is a great way to build community. It makes me think of the wall. Thank you for inspiring me, right? Hey, Thank you for that unearned grace you gave me. And Matt, I think grace, we heard all over this conference, and I think all over higher ed, that is the thing we are having to relearn and reteach our students.
Yeah, it's interesting. So we'll talk more about student leaders, but it's really interesting where for a year, at least a year, student leader meetings were on Zoom. And we were hearing that students today, and when they're present, they're having a lot of conflict and they don't know how to resolve it, because when they were on Zoom, they could just buy in the meeting. They could just leave the meeting, right? And now you can't do that. It's not just a click buy. It's, ugh, I'm in the room with this person and I don't like what they were saying, or I don't feel like they understood what I was saying, or right, all of that conflict. And I love their emphasis on grace, because so much of what we need right now is to just like, fine, they don't earn it. I'm just going to give it to them and let it go. And then how that can then just continue. It's a nice paid forward gift.
Yeah. The guidance that I heard a lot, specifically in this session, is the idea of do more. But that reframed, instead of do more, like do the right things well. So they talked about, you can plant 100 trees. You can just throw seeds out and you can plant 100 trees, right? But then maybe you don't have the resources to take care of them. We don't really know what's going to happen. Some of them will thrive, but we don't know. Or you could just do 10. You could just do 10 trees because you have the capacity to serve 10 trees, right? And so I find that incredibly helpful as I'm thinking about building in joy, because things get added to our plates and added to our plates and added to our plates. And at some point we have to say, it's just too many things. I'm not doing any of them well. I'm going to pick the most important things, and that's where I'm going to invest my time in. And I think that's a good lesson for students as well.
Yeah, it's a really great analogy of how are you going to balance this, what you want to accomplish, but what can you do that will be long lasting? Yeah. Right. And so this effort, focusing your effort on the things that will help you really, truly rebuild your student resilience and rebuild your community, rather than just kind of scattering out and hoping it all makes some kind of impact.
Yeah, for sure. All right. The next section that I want to talk about is counseling on campus. Oh my goodness. First of all, this is a packed conversation. So there was standing room only in this room, which just tells you that it is a hot topic. So let me just run through. Here's what I heard. Here's kind of the arc of the conversation in the room. First of all, we're in a really difficult position because for many, many years, best practice counseling, when I worked at a counseling center on a campus, best practice counseling, this is a long time, this is 20 years ago, right? Was 50-minute sessions once a week for 2 years. I had 12 clients and I saw them every single week until we felt like we were done. Oftentimes they would come back multiple years. That is not sustainable.
Yeah.
There's no way we can do that on our campuses, but there's something to be said about how counselors decided that was a best practice. We need to have regular, often meeting times over a longer period of time, right? So part of the hardship is we can't sustain best practice counseling. We have to think of different ways to be able to give counseling to our students.
And that's because the number of students who are seeking counseling services has skyrocketed, right? So like 20 years ago, it was like 5% of the student population that was seeking counseling or needed counseling services from the school.
Right.
And now, I mean, it's I don't know, what, 25%, 30%?
No. I mean, the numbers I've seen recently are like between 45 and 50 students would like to have some kind of counseling service.
50% of students, yeah.
Yeah. So, and the issues, it's really interesting because you have this spectrum of issues where you have some students who are like, I need counseling for anxiety and stress. And then you have this other population of students who have significant psychiatric difficulties. They need a lot of resources. Whereas when I was doing counseling, it was like breakups, family issues, maybe some kind of eating disorder and cutting kind of stuff in the middle there would be like the most severe things we're talking about. But you have this really interesting tail on both sides of the bell curve where it's like pretty low intensity things that we've got to talk about, stress and depression kind of things, and then this much higher need population. So it's interesting because there was a lot of conversation in the room for counseling about how before COVID, it was an acceptable message to say, we will support your student, but we can't provide outpatient intensive care, or we can't provide 50 minutes of meeting with a counselor every week. So it used to be that was an acceptable message to give parents. And now they're saying COVID really turned that on its head because in so many cases, schools went above and beyond to support their students, right? So they're like, we'll find you a therapist in your hometown. We'll do telehealth. We'll do everything we can. And so it kind of broke the message of we don't provide that. Parents are like, but you have been providing it and we expect you to continue providing that. So that's a really interesting element there. The right conversation, I think, for counseling centers is what are the demands that we are going to ask our counseling center to meet? So that is, what is your capacity to serve? And that has to be tied. It's just like any other resource. If we can only see X number of students in an intensive way, then we can't admit more than that, or we've got to get more resources for that. So what is your capacity to serve? What kind of issues can you serve? How does your mission, whatever your mission and your vision on your campus, how does that tie to then that capacity to serve? Are you allowed to say, I'm sorry, we can't serve you? Or is it the antithesis of your mission to serve your students? So a lot of really interesting conversation around that. The biggest element that I heard is, what do parents think our capacity to serve is? So lots of conversation of like, I'm not telling you not to send your son or daughter here, but you have to understand what is realistic, what we can actually offer to you. And being honest with parents, that's like, we have certain limitations. You need to make the right choice for your student, but we can't do more than we can actually do. And the question of when you have that conversation and who has it. So does admissions have that conversation? What are the mechanisms for you to do assessments for students that have psychological needs? When is your care plan created? for students, like at what point in the enrollment process do you say, here's the plan? There was a school that was saying they admitted a student who, like in the second week, started having some real difficulties. And the dean of students went to her and said, hey, what's happening? Like, it seems like you're really overwhelmed. She said, well, I expected this to happen. This is the 7th time I have started college.
Wow.
At 7 different colleges, she had gone for the first semester and had this overwhelming experience where she went home. And the dean of students was saying, I had no idea. I don't know that admissions knew that. I didn't know it. And so when do we assess the students' needs, and how are we proactive before they start accumulating success debt to say, here is the plan so that you can be successful in your classes and be successful in our community? I think it's a really important question.
It's just so important. If you're feeling overwhelmed, like your counseling services is being overwhelmed, the demand is much greater than you have the capacity to serve, then you really need to start thinking about, how can we be sustainable? What can we provide? Who are some partners or ways that we can form partnerships to be able to boost our capacity outside of the school, right?
Yeah, that's right.
What are the ways that we're going to do some initial, because I think there's an important piece with counseling services, and that is for the school to have some insight into what's happening with their students. But then there are some handoffs that need to be made so that that student can receive the support, rather than, I mean, it's not a plan to say, I'm going to see you every 8 weeks and you're going to flounder for 7 weeks until I can see you again. That's not a real plan. So
yeah, for sure. And actually, it's really interesting. A lot of conversation about some faculty and staff feeling very anxious and panicked, very anxious and panicked about the idea that they would be able to help students instead of just taking them to the counseling center. So you have to say in your counseling center, here are the things that we are going to manage. These are things that we need to get outside help to do, right? Like, we can't manage these really high need students. And then also, we have to teach our faculty that if a student is crying and you say, what's happening? And they're like, I had a bad day. They don't have to go to the counseling center. You can just say, I'm really sorry you're having such a bad day. What's going on? We don't have to outsource those kinds of conversations. We can have those conversations with students. Matt, I was telling you earlier when we were talking about this, like, I don't know what people think happen in counseling, but mostly when I'm doing counseling, I just have a empathetic face on and I just say, oh my gosh, that must be so hard for you. Tell me more, right? I don't say anything to solve the problem. It's not like when a student's having a bad day, we take them to the counseling center and then they're going to be like, okay, here's what I'm going to say. And now you're going to feel better. Right. No, anybody can be trained to be an empathetic listener and just say, I'm really sorry. That must be so hard. I will check in with you in a week. I hope things are better for you. Right. So that training and work so that you can have multiple people on your campus who feel comfortable having those conversations with students, instead of anytime a student is feeling any feeling, we got to take them to the counseling center so we can get it solved. I was also saying stress and anxiety. Like, if you have stress and anxiety because you have a test coming up, that's right. We can't fix that in counseling. That's the way it is, right?
It makes me think of Dr. Schlachter when I was in my master's program at Arizona State. He's like, you seem like you're very stressed. And I'm like, I don't want to talk about it. He's like, no, let's just, and he didn't send me to a counseling center. He just wanted to talk about stress and what the root of stress is. And by the time, I mean, this is a short 5-minute conversation. By the time we're done, I'm back on track, and so it is important. I think that's probably one of the most interesting things about what we need to recover from with COVID is like, hey, that's a really appropriate role for you to have. Yeah. And please take that on, because we're really overwhelmed with the number of students we're seeing. That would give us a lot of course, also, just having a strong early alert system is a good tool as well. But
one other thing I wanted to say about that is that not only are schools seeing where people are saying you need to go to the counseling center, but Matt, also public safety. Holy cow, these stories where like there's some roommate conflict and one roommate calls campus police, not like, hey, RA, I'm mad because blah, 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 but like calls campus police. And then they come and then they are like, you can't do that. This is, so that it's just like we've lost the nuance of community and relationship to say we could probably work this out without getting the police, you know,
I
or
wish we could run a
probably
poll
work
right
this out
now.
without
Yeah.
counseling. Sorry, say again.
Oh, I just wish we could run a poll right now for those who are watching and listening, because I want to hear real stories about that. Like, I know that you came out of that session and you're like, Matt, this is what's going on now.
Yeah.
There's just so much. It goes back to so much teaching to do. And again, we've had a couple of years where how do you resolve conflict? How do you resolve conflict with your roommate? Don't call the police on them.
Right.
Unless you need to.
Well, and what's interesting is part of the reflection of that was that RAs are like, yeah, call the police because I don't feel equipped to help you manage this. Right. So it's this trickle down of like RAs don't know how to manage the conflict. So their students don't know how to manage the conflict. And so we have to do this high level. You're going to talk about it later. Like assume everybody needs basic training, right? In whatever the issue is. So
yeah, hang on. I know.
Okay, I'm going to make this one very, very short because I have two great resources for you. So the next section is bridging the gap for what? Yeah.
It's so good. Yeah. This is
for
so
first generation and high needs students. The things that I want to pull out of this conversation is somebody said in one of these sessions, so, you know, we're talking about sense of belonging all the time. Somebody said in one of these sessions, you have to make sure that students are also connected to themselves. You have to keep them connected to themselves, which I love the balance of. Sense of belonging is not that you come to campus and then you just forget where you come from. Yeah. And you just like assimilate into whatever, but actually that you are connected to yourself and your family and your history and everything that's true about you. And at the same time, feel strongly that you have a sense of belonging on our campus. I love those two things in conjunction because I think you can get confused if you don't put them together, right? So just talking about things like grocery stores, like can you get the stuff that your mom used to make for you at home at the grocery store? If no, do we have a list of resources? Like you should go to H-E-B. They're going to have those ingredients. They're going to have the kind of fruit that you're used to eating. It was amazing. Students were in this session and they were saying, when I came here, I just wanted to make this thing my mom would make. And I couldn't find all of the ingredients to be able to do it. So things like cultural clubs and weekly festivals. So at Boston College, every week, a different cultural club has a festival where they just talk about their dress and their food and their traditions. And it's a way to keep them connected to themselves and at the same time, create space for them to belong on campus. So
it's good.
Love that. The model that I have for you guys is the Montserrat model for Boston College. This is kind of an association on campus. Their mission is to provide students with access and support to all areas of student life not covered in a financial aid package. So they serve about 2,000 students. It's like 15% of the population at Boston College. But here's what I love. It started with tickets to basketball games and to like, you know, we have this play. Would you like to go to that? We know that's not covered in the financial aid that we gave you. And then it expanded to, you need a dorm fridge. We can get that for you. And then it expanded and expanded and expanded. So now they cover work study notifications. So they have a whole handbook that's like, here's what work study is. Here are the best places for you to work. Here are the places that include housing. Here are places that you can work over the summer. They just are very, very detailed and specific about everything that these students might need to know about. They talk about study abroad. You should do study abroad. Here's how you can pay for it. This is why it's important. Here's the process. Tickets, academic enrichment, funding requests. One of my favorite thing in their handbook for students is like, here's why you have to buy your textbooks. You can buy them at Amazon. If you can't find them on Amazon, you should look here and here. If you can't find them there, we have a rental program through this association, so you can see if you can rent it. The last resort is for you to buy it from the bookstore because they're super expensive. But you should know that they have a price matching. So if you find it on Amazon, you can go to the bookstore and they will price match it. It just every specific detail that a student would need to know.
I mean, really super thorough. It was like a great crowdsourcing of what students needed to know, what students knew.
Yeah.
And really, it's a resource that you could download. It's available for you to look at and then adapt for your campus, because everything that they've addressed, you have students on your campus who have the same kinds of questions. So
yeah, for sure.
It's
The last
amazing
thing about it is that they also have a parent guide, which just addresses like all of the hidden curriculum. When your student says this, here's what they mean. When they talk about study abroad, this is why that's important. When they say that they're going to this thing, that's what this looks like. So anyway, it's a great resource. We could talk ad nauseum about it, but I would just go check it out. And like you said, Matt, use it just as a template for here is how we are going to adjust our language for students who don't understand this hidden curriculum.
So I'm going to transition this into the last part, which is just increasing student engagement to the pre-pandemic levels. But I would take that guide and lay it out and ask people in the room if they had the answer for students on your campus. Because what I'm seeing, so went to several sessions about how do we increase student engagement to the levels that we had before we sent them all home and then we had to distance and all of that. And one of the huge things is a lack of institutional knowledge. And it's not just students not knowing, it's that faculty and staff have lost institutional knowledge as well. So I want to go through this session, but I think that's a great exercise, is to just go through and say, like, could we answer this question for our campus? And there are people around the room who don't know the answer because they're new, or things have changed. But thinking about how do we level students back up to the level of engagement that they had before we sent them home. As I sat through these sessions, and then I applied it to what I know about our schools and the school where my son's going right now, and which is my alma mater, and what I know about traditions, there's a lot that I want to go through. But one of the first questions is, what is student engagement? And in that question, that's how they started it off. What is student engagement? And then how would you measure success for student engagement on your campus? Really important question. And Rachel, you had an article that kind of brought this out and said, are we talking about student engagement, or should we be talking about engaged students and the difference in that?
Yeah, so it's really interesting because they're saying student engagement is a concept, but engaged students is an outcome. So this article, I would just read it because it's like everybody defines engagement differently and nobody actually knows what we're talking about. A lot of people are like, oh, you just mean getting students to go to class. No, that's not what we're talking about, right? But this idea that an engaged student demonstrates interest, motivation, and intention, where student engagement is about involving students. So there is a distinction about what those two, either a concept or an outcome, look like.
So thinking about that, and then looking at, so one of the big issues of how do we measure success, and how do we measure that our students are thriving? I think that's an important outcome. And so when you're looking at a campus of 11,000 students, and you have an event and you have 100 students come, that's great for those 100 students. What about the other 10,900 students who didn't come? Are they engaged? Are you measuring all the different ways that they are engaged on your campus or not engaged on your campus?
And fundamentally, how are you finding your quiet students, right? There are students who, for student engagement, will come to all of your things all the time. And then there are a bunch of students who will never come to anything you do. And how do we appeal to those students, right?
Yeah. So I want to just break down loss of institutional knowledge or institutional memory in a few places. And so for those who are watching and listening, to just think about this for your campus. One is a huge question, both from staff, new staff. So a lot of our schools have hired a lot of new people over the last 2 years. Some in the room were saying most of my team is new in the last year, new.
Wow.
Had not been affiliated with the institution. And students also have this question like, what is there to love about this tradition you keep talking about? This significant event that I'm supposed to be a part of? What is there to love about that? And they just don't get it because it hasn't happened. Or if it did happen, it may have come off kind of put together, quickly. And
yeah.
So
Matt, I have a great example of this because if I said to you, so much of that is about the history and about the story and about how it got started, like anything on your campus, how it got started, what's the story, right? So if I said to our listeners, well, the really big thing when Matt and I were in school is this, you get a bunch of people and they write songs and they sing a cappella and they move their hands in unison.
Dress up in costumes with a theme.
And it's huge. It's like people come from all over to listen to these songs. And our listeners might be like, have you lost your mind? That doesn't sound like such a great event. However, this is actually Matt in Sing Song, right? So, but if you lose the story and my mom was in Sing Song and here's why we do it and Bob Hunter started it and this is what, if you lose the story of that, all traditions seem pretty stupid without the story and the meaning behind it,
Yeah, absolutely.
So you have to imbue it with this full understanding of why this is such a cool thing that we do and why you want to invest in it.
So we're having a lot of challenges on our campuses. I think this is happening on your campus. There's a decline in junior and senior leadership, in taking leadership roles, which is really surprising. A lot of seniors have kind of pulled out because they weren't as connected as maybe we were when we were seniors. And so they're kind of pulling out and now they're looking for jobs and they're just not connected. There's a lot of that happening. But also they were talking about you've got juniors and seniors who had to delay going on study abroad. And so they're now doing study abroad. And so you're losing a lot of, those are high engaged students. You're losing that. They're talking about students who just are like behind on everything. They don't turn in their paperwork. They're not following deadlines. They don't understand how serious this is. And now they're not following the administrative process and they're not going to get their budget money. And I mean, there's just a lot of, oh, well, okay, I guess it wasn't that important to make that investment. And so at this conference, what came out of it was, hey, remember why we're doing student development, student engagement, and that student leadership isn't just for student leaders to be on campus. It's to develop their leadership skills and give opportunities. And what's happening, what's really interesting is who's missing out on some of these opportunities. So one thing that came up was I'm dealing with students who are saying they need to be paid if they're going to take that student leadership role because the opportunity cost is they're not working, they're not earning more money, that their family is saying, hey, you could be making $15 an hour, but you're spending 30 hours a week doing this other student leadership role. So a lot of challenges there. One big question is how do we incentivize student engagement? And one school was like, hey, we're having to be really creative and we're actually trying to meet their needs, not just give them pizza, but we have drawings for like an air fryer, like an actual thing that will help them. So interesting. That's like great. I said, there's a lot of challenges on the staff side. And so there's a lot of new, there's also a lot of understaffed offices. So for student engagement, where you have like over 100 student organizations and only 2 people to help. So that leads to reduced activities. And what then comes out of that is, hey, we need to really use technology so that we can be more effective in all that. Otherwise, how are we going to recover and help and pour into these students in all of these ways? So I'll close with this. The University of Scranton put together a 4-part strategy to recover. One, they said, we've got to get back to the basics. Like you said, it's literally, we have to focus on building up core functions like, hey, students, this is how you run a meeting. These are the kinds of events that worked for you in the past. try these out. Assume everyone needs basic training. 2, we have to reset our expectations. We need to reconsider what we're asking clubs to accomplish, and we have to remove our administrative hurdles. Like, let's get all of that out of the way. 3, streamline. So create standard practices that are accessible and repeatable. We've got to incorporate technology so we can have more workflows and automation so students can say, they'll say like upload here, upload here, upload here, and guide them right through the process. And then finally, and I love this, reimagine and also let go. So build new scaffolds for future years. We've got to work with our freshmen and our sophomores. It's going to take a slow rebuild to get them back up. And then also consider if some of those pre-pandemic practices still help, still serve. And if not, maybe it's time to let them go. I'm not ready to let go of Sing Song, but this was actually
don't touch that one. Yeah, don't touch that one. I think it's so helpful just to think about the where we started with. We got to get them coached up. They just haven't practiced. We've just got to help our students and our community relearn all of these different elements that we haven't exercised that muscle in a while. And so instead of deficit language, we just say, we're just rebuilding. We're going to figure out, how to get better at that. Okay. One thing I want to tell you, I have just started to hear in all of my meetings with schools, summer projects, which I like this time of year because we are creating our list of things that we want to invest in this summer. So if you are thinking about some of those things, what you want to use the summer to build, we'd love to talk to you about those things. And just really exciting to be wrapping up this spring semester, doing registrations for the fall, which I think then always pushes our brain towards what are the new initiatives and the new things that we want to accomplish as we're looking at the next fall semester. All right, Matt, those are hot topics in student affairs. Thank you guys for joining us. And
hey, Rachel.
Yes.
If you like Cap and Gown, follow us on LinkedIn. You'll get the updates every time. A little reminder.
I do like Cap and Gown. I do follow us on LinkedIn. You mean everybody?
Yeah, everyone. We'll look forward to seeing you next week.
Thanks, guys.